Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started for our webinar today. And it's June 11th. And today on our Global Business Leaders Forum, we have a special guest who's been around and with us and taught us before, Dave Power. Dave, welcome to the webinar, and we're looking forward to you sharing on design thinking today.
Thanks so much, Keith. So I'm going to just share a screen here, bring up a few slides I'd like to use.
Okay, and David, let me go ahead and just butt in just for a moment and tell a little bit about you and the background while you're go ahead and forward those slides. So Dave is currently the CEO of the Perkins School, which is located in the Northeast. And the Perkins School helps those who are blind and visually impaired create skills, ability, learning for a life that can thrive. And Dave has been there for about 6 years. Prior to that, he was the leader of Power Strategy, his consulting and coaching firm. That's where we first encountered David. And he was writing his book called The Curve Ahead. And so David joined our former community, and we developed a great relationship, as he did with many coaches, and had the opportunity to review his book as he released it, which was a fantastic read called The Curve Ahead by Dave Power. Prior to that, Dave has been a CEO in the software space, a former vice president of Sun Microsystems, and just very, very well both educated and experienced man when it comes to leadership and technology organizations, and now in what I would call a community organization, making a huge difference in the world with the Perkins School. And Dave and his family live outside of the Boston area, but he's been known to be all over the globe at times in his career. So, Dave, over to you. A few opening comments, and then lead us in today's discussion on design thinking.
Well, thank you, Keith. I've enjoyed many years of professional association and friendship with Keith, and we have a shared interest in helping growth companies to keep growing. And that's really where we intersect, and that's really what I want to talk about today. I have a kind of eclectic background. I'm going to argue that it sort of helped me to make some observations that I want to share with you that I think can help you with whatever organization that you're leading to think about ways to drive growth. I mean, we as leaders, growth is what we're looking for. It's what is expected from us. Stock price valuation methods are all driven by growth metrics. And so, well, you know, how do we really grow? And one of the things that really struck me was that growth companies, for some reason, seem to stop growing. And what is it we can do about that? That was the basis for the book I wrote. So with that, I'm going to launch into it, if you don't mind, Keith. And let me get into presentation mode. So I chose the title Designing for Growth. It sounds a little abstract, but growth is the goal here. And I'm talking about how to design your business strategies, but most important, your processes for new product and service development and growth, next generation growth. That's what this is all about. And I'm going to talk about a technique called design thinking. You may be familiar with. If not, I want to encourage you to learn a little bit more about it. My goal today is to give you some new pattern recognition skills. Next time you read the Wall Street Journal or whatever you read, I want you to see what I see, which is these S curves. We'll talk about this a little bit, but you know, core businesses that seem to sort of slow and lose momentum, but the great companies seem to continuously find the next basis for growth, and it's no accident how they get there. I also want to give you all a sense of urgency that this is not something that you can put on the back burner. This is required urgency and attention to address. I'll talk a little bit about why. I want to give you all confidence that no matter what organization you're leading, you can adopt these. If I can do this anywhere from a software startup to the Perkins School for the Blind, and I have, I think you'll see this is quite a versatile set of tools. Finally, I'll give you a first look at some tools, but for the amount of time we have today, let's. I think that that'll be enough for us to get started with. Here's where I came. I started as an engineer, camp dresser in McKee, water pollution control engineering. I got involved in business school, management consulting. I learned the sort of tools of decision thinkers, which is kind of the opposite of design thinking, is something I want to talk about. But I spent a big portion of my career working in the software industry with growth companies. And here's where I observed firsthand the things that get in the way of companies that should have long, long continuous growth streaks. And so partly I share this because anytime you listen to a speaker or read a book, you want to say, well, where's this person coming from? Where are these ideas come from? And I assure you, all these came sort of bottom up, grounded in the experiences that I have. I was an investor in growth stage companies for a decade, and I used a lot of those insights in the consulting practice I had called Power Strategy. As Keith mentioned, I reduced these all into a book, Power Strategy, before I got called in to do some mission work. And because of my family association with the Perkins School for the Blind, I took on thinking about where we go with this institution that's been around already for 190 years. So what does the next 190 look like? So that's a little bit about me. I would like to, let me see if I can get to my advancing. Oh, there we go. Okay.
And David, while you're making that change too, you currently are teaching at Harvard Extension on design thinking, and you've been doing that for the last decade, correct?
I have. Yeah, still teaching design thinking with a colleague from a design thinking firm called Continuum Innovation. And we teach it 4 or 5 times a year. We get about 45 people from around the world, every possible industry. So I've had a chance to keep the momentum going. For me, it keeps me fresh. I bring more ideas back into Perkins, share more ideas back out. So let me just start with the story of LoJack. LoJack is the device to protect your car from being stolen, a little radio device you stick in your car. Many of you may have had it. LoJack was the story of a great growth company in the 90s, the invention of this technology, lots of interesting business strategies where dealers were allowed to install the device and got some revenue. The company acquired a related technology called Boomerang. Business Week called LoJack the hot growth company. That might be a kiss of death, by the way. But interestingly, when you look at the underlying metrics of LoJack, the rate of growth, although they're growing, the rate of growth is dropping. And you can sort of guess that as a curve matures over time. You can't grow exponentially forever. But here you can see that just when Business Week is declaring them a hot company, their annual growth rate is dropping below 5%. This is something I think really to pay attention to as you look at so-called growth companies. So what happened right after that announcement is, look what happened to LoJack's revenues. Just when they were supposed to be on a tear, when you're supposed to put your 401k into the company, they hit market saturation. Turned out 7% is about all you're going to get in the car ownership market for people buying devices to prevent theft. It's a learning from the market. There was a decline in car thefts as a result of it, and competition from other devices came along, such that the growth rate dropped precipitously, actually went negative. And this is what happened to their stock price. It tanked really and never recovered. So this is a story that we see in lots of places. What's really going on with LoJack and other companies that experience this? And I like to tell the story of kind of the simple innovation. Imagine any new product or service from its earliest days. And so I'm using this graph of revenue and time. And when you're building a new growth company, if you get to 10 million in revenues, that's an amazing accomplishment. And the feeling the team has at this point is that you're going to, it's going to be a rocket ship to the moon. You can't get enough resources to grow this business, this product or service like crazy. Unfortunately, what that growth curve ends up looking like is this. It's the S curve. its maturity sets in. If we are together in a room, I would ask you, what are the causes? All of you have seen this, and I'd ask, what are the causes? And we'd probably have a 15-minute conversation talking about things like, well, you know, saturation. You got the easy customers over time. You have to get the harder customers. Price competition. Others come into the market, steal a portion of the market, drive the price down. There's an organizational part of this. As businesses get bigger, organizations get more complex. All the things you used to do in one office in somebody's basement, now you have multiple offices, field offices, time zone changes. The skill sets, the skills of the entrepreneurs that get a business off the ground from 0 to 5 are very different from people that can get you from 20 million to 100 million in revenue. And that changeover involves people management and growth. And all of those factors weigh down. And I'm not just talking about changes of technology that weigh down the ability to grow for a long period of time. There's no way to escape this any more than you can escape death and taxes. I like to talk about real company stories along the way, and not just theoretical graphs. And these graphs I'm showing you, I go to the company's 10Ks. I get the actual data from the companies. So these S curves come right out of the live data of companies. So, you know, Netflix, in its first decade or so, they were, you might recall, a DVD rental company. So instead of going to Blockbuster, they'll mail you the DVD. And I mean, who wouldn't love a business where in 10 years you could get to over $1.2 billion in revenue, which is what they did. Right around this time, if you read their annual report, hey guys, on the horizon is something called video on demand. Looks like a competitive risk. We should keep our eyes open. And you know, if Netflix just sort of stuck with it and did DVD rentals for the next 10 years or so, this is what they would look like. This is their DVD rental only business. Still alive, but obviously it not only reached maturity of the S curve, but declined. That's ultimately what happens with S curves. Fortunately, sometime around 2008, they introduced streaming as an option instead of DVD. They had them both going actually concurrently between 2008 and 2011. And that bet that they made on, I have to squish the graph here to show how big a company they've become now at 20 billion, because they bet on that next S curve, first US streaming and then international streaming. You know, Apple's one of the most valuable companies in the world and is a great growth story. If you look at Apple's growth and you break it down into the individual lines of business, and then you look at those individual lines of business, you see really where the action is in running a growth company. Companies like Apple, Salesforce, Amazon, they are paranoid about losing momentum in their existing product lines and constantly making bets in new ones. So here's what I learned when I disaggregated their data by product line. You can see the original laptop and Mac business kind of flattened out in the early 2000s. They brought a bit of life to it. It's not gone, but it's not a source of great growth. The iPad held great promise for a while, but really it's not going to save the company in any respects. iPod was really cool for about 4 years. It grew and then it declined. And so you can see that Apple is really kind of betting the farm right now on the iPhone. And, you know, all of these were innovations during the Steve Jobs period. So, you know, you can't look at growth strategy without looking at the individuals who are behind, you know, what it takes to get a new S-curve off the ground. I mean, Netflix was Reed Hastings, you know, force of personality. All of these products driven by Steve Jobs. How long can Apple go on these products? When does the wristwatch or the next thing come along? This is what investors are asking all the time. And, you know, this is the way to sort of look at what's going on there. Just to, you know, jump to some other, you know, companies and organizations that I see in the news. Chobani was very interesting as they came into the yogurt market, because there's a phenomenon where I call stretching the S-curve. So they came in and they sold yogurt, and then they sold it in the US, then they sold it internationally, then they put it in 4-ounce jars, 8-ounce, added different fruit, different things to mix it up, but it's the same S-curve. That's not getting you into a whole new market. And when I saw that S-curve, that Chobani was becoming more than 50% of the yogurt market, it just occurred to me, for them to continue to grow, they have to get into a completely different segment, either get people to have a different food and substitute yogurt, in other words, have yogurt instead of cereal, or get into some other categories. And indeed, if you look at what Chobani has done, they've moved into the milk market. They make oat milk. And in the last 3 months, they're now number 2 in oat milk. And that is an S-curve. That's truly getting them into another very big market. So I'm just trying to share with you what it looks like when organizations find that next source of growth. Harvard has had for a long time their extension school, which you don't need to apply to Harvard. You can take a course in a variety of topics with Harvard Extension School. But over the last, I'd say, 5-10 years or so, Harvard's really asked itself the question, how long will brick and mortar college campuses be the experience for getting a college degree? And at what point will the online portion of education become much more dominant? So Harvard Extension has been their experiment. Harvard Extension actually issues bachelor's degrees and master's degrees without going to the school, without applying. Obviously, you have to apply for the individual courses. At a much lower price point. You could probably get a degree for something in the range of $30,000 to $40,000. So it's not the same experience as walking into Harvard Square and being in those wonderful buildings, but it's a degree program that's gaining great currency around the world. It's opening up massive new markets where higher education is of great interest to developing economies. This is where I teach a 2-day program. It's executive training, and I'm amazed at how many places from around the world people come to hear my design thinking class. So Harvard is running this kind of, it's more than an experiment. I think it's the fastest growing source of revenues and students at Harvard. And so we'll see how big an S-curve it becomes and what comes next, but clearly they're willing to make these bets and make these experiments. Shifting gears further, just yesterday, I read that the Ford Foundation and 3 other very large foundations like it have decided that they want to break the mold that they're stuck in. Foundations get money from donors, and they allow themselves to draw 5% of the endowment that they've been given, either by Ford himself or the Mellon Foundation, wherever the money comes from and continues to come from. The notion that you've got this sort of endowed fund, you pull 5% out, just as you might from a retirement fund if you retired, and it was your nest egg to live on forever. But the Ford Foundation said, hey, there's more problems in the world than we can solve with the 5%. And we've got this great brand and great know-how. One of the things that drove them was all the needs from coronavirus. So Ford Foundation is borrowing $1 billion, and they're going to give it away because they've got borrowing capacity, because it allows them to have immediate impact as a nonprofit. 3 other foundations are following this lead, and no one really knows exactly where this is going to go, but it's a breakout idea. It's a very different S-curve for a foundation. And so again, I'm drawing from widely different business models to give you a sense of the thinking and how it can be applied to a number of different organizations to make sure you never kind of flatten out. So if you said, well, what's the answer? What do we need to be able to do to address this problem and make sure our own organization never is one of the ones that flattens out forever? You need some kind of an innovation process that gets you from, the core business to a new source of revenue. And that innovation process if you tried to map where your business is on this curve on the left, if we were in a room, I'd say everybody grab a marker and just put a mark on that S curve on the left where it says core business. And I know all of you would grab your marker and run right out there and say, well, sure, I'm right here. And then there's, just before you get that dot on the paper, there's this hesitancy because, well, I mean, LoJack thought they were pretty low on this curve, and then a year later they were tanking. Other businesses are fortunate in that they think they're pretty much mature and they've run out of growth options, and growth keeps coming. Sometimes something comes along like coronavirus, and the Zoom technology we're using goes through the roof in terms of growth. So you never really know. That's the real issue here. You can't, I can tell you for sure that the shape of your revenue curve is an S curve. But beyond that, the timing and the exact kind of points of inclination of that S curve are really unknowable. And so one of the issues is if you say to yourself, well, when do I need to get started in planning for a next source of revenue? You're never going to have a confident answer to that. You're never going to be able to game it any more than you can buy stocks low and sell them high. Similarly, if you said to yourself, well, okay, I'm pretty sure I need a new source of revenue sometime pretty soon. So how long is it going to take me to have a new product or service that can deliver enough revenue to offset the decline in the core business? Unfortunately, that's not an answer, a question you're going to be able to answer either. In fact, that nice looking dark blue S curve on the right might be the result of 10 tries where 9 were failures and the 10th finally took hold. It might not be as big as that. It might be a small S curve, in which case you might need another and another. The great growth companies think of sustainable growth in terms of a series of S curves so that you're never done with this. So I want to, the reason I mention that is that when you think about, well, when do I need this, whatever innovation process I'm going to need, when do I need to put it in place, and when do I need to kick it in gear to get, to achieve the sustainable growth outcome? And the answer is you need it continuously. Because you can't predict either curve, you need a continuous innovation process. And if you meet with the leaders of the big tech companies, for sure, because you read about them, Facebook, Amazon, others, those leaders are constantly worried, and they should. Facebook is on the decline. Instagram is hotter. Snapchat is hotter. You've always got to be looking to the next thing. So I want to talk about what's in the middle here, because this is really my own personal discovery. Was I observed these curves, I watched businesses decline, I watched the smart companies come up with the new ones, and I asked myself, what is the process by which the successful companies are moving forward? And what I would say stumbled across about 8 years ago, it's not when it began, but it's when I began to be aware and a student of this approach, is design thinking. It's making its way around, so you may know of design thinking. So hopefully I don't cover too much ground that you're aware of here, but it's not completely into the mainstream. Design thinking, what is it? It's a different approach to problem solving. So you would use the term design thinking like you might use the term strategic planning. It's an approach to accomplish something. There's no single framework for doing it. There's many different ways that people would recommend doing it, but I'm going to try to get you to the core of what you need to know so that you can apply design thinking to the process that's going to get you to your next S curve. So it's a problem-solving approach, typically used for one-of-a-kind problems where there's no formula. And I think the most important premise here, and one of the things that I hope that you take away from this discussion today, is that it's based on the premise that innovation begins with the customers. In other words, you're going to discover the next opportunity to grow your business from your customers. You're not going to do it in a whiteboard. You're not going to do it with engineers inventing things. It's a discovery process. And it's not an easy discovery process, but it requires you to get out of your office, spend time with your customers, and find what is the next problem you can solve for them. Because the next problem that you can solve for them, it has a very high chance of being your S-curve. And the good news is you have customers that you can talk to. So you don't have to, like a startup, you don't have to find brand new customers. For most organizations, you can find that next S-curve from customers that you already serve, but you have to spend time with them. There's two really important questions. They're really simple, but they're questions that most businesses seem to miss on the way to developing growth strategies. Answering really clearly, who are we building this for? You would be amazed. I spent 10 years as a venture capitalist meeting startups and asking them these two questions. And I would say 4 out of 5 would be stumped. Their mouths would be moving, but they would not be answering this question. They would not be answering either questions because they didn't know the answer. So who is the customer? And what exactly is the problem you're solving? Not what's the technology, what's the widget, what's the service, but what's the problem for that customer you're solving? If you can answer that, you know where the market is, you know where the value is, and you can design around that. So a couple of things I want to say. I want to introduce a couple of words, if they're not a regular part of your vocabulary, but that are really important in this design for growth process. One of those words is empathy. Empathy is the skill of being able to feel what someone else feels. It's, it's psychiatrists use empathy, and your best friends that know you well have empathy. They say things like, I feel your pain, I feel for you. It's a feeling kind of skill. Not everybody has it, but it's a really critical skill to do design thinking, because when you go to customers, you're not doing Survey Monkey, you're not asking survey questions, you're listening. You're trying to understand what their life is like, what their job is like, what are the challenges they're facing, and you're sifting through with a Zen open mind, and you're listening for, what is the problem that they have that they might not even be aware of, that I might be able to put my finger on. And if you have that problem, if you know they have the problem, then you're quite sure that if you come up with a solution for that, and that's not trivial, but if you can, you know you've got a market for it. So this skill of empathy is really important. If you and others on your team don't have it, you need to get someone on your team that does, because it's crucial, because you won't get the experiential part of what the customers need. Customers don't just need functional solutions or features. Customers react to a product or service in an emotional way. And that's why I want to give you this other term that's really important, because it's the new metric for everything. And that's customer experience. Customers are evaluating you not just on your product and service, but the overall experience. You can actually offset a weak product with better service and better other aspects of the customer experience. And so what does experience mean to your customer? There's no way to know unless you go spend time with them and use the skills of empathy to know what they experience when they solve a problem with your product, and therefore what are the emotional components that you have to put in place in addition to solving the problem that they've got. So those are not words that I used much when I was in business school, but I know that leading organizations today are very much on top of having empathy skills and understanding the customer experience. Design thinking is not the same as business thinking. Design thinkers are more like architects and designers. They're not driven by deadlines. They're driven by getting to the core. They're willing to start all over again until they get it right. Business thinkers have a deadline and a budget, and partially done is better than not done at all. And look, we need both, but there's a time when we need them. And the design thinker is best in the front end of the process when we're listening to the customer to find out what the problem is. The business thinker is better when we go to market and figure out how to do pricing and other sorts of things. We need both on our teams. Most businesses are overweighted with business thinkers and underweighted with design thinkers. Oh, let me get my slide advancer here. I'm getting master. So, I went out and looked for who's got a good process for design thinking. And Stanford has the D.school, the Stanford School for Design. You can go on the internet, you can find half a dozen, 10 different design thinking approaches. And I just picked this one because it's a generic one. Here's what I did. I lined them all up and I said, what's common about them? And I realized, and these are all good processes and good people and whatnot. Some of these are very good authors that have written some good books on the topic. One thing I realized is common about all of them, and that is that they follow the same sequence. They always go in the same order. They do use different words, but they always begin with a process of learning and discovery from the customer, every single one. None of them goes to designing or thinking about a product until the discovery phase of the customer is done. They do that first, they figure out what the design challenge is, and then they think about the product. That's not what every organization does, as you can imagine. Then what they do is before they go too far, they go test their idea, their prototype with the customers before they go into business model in the final stages. So that's a really important sequence. I put this sequence into just a simple framework that looks like this. You will see this in the curve ahead. There's nothing remarkable about this sequence. It's intended to be very simple because I wanted businesses, particularly small businesses that don't have big staff and design staffs, to have a very useful framework. Learn first, then design, then test, and then model. And here's a little more detail. Learn from customers, create explorations, select and design. Here's where you do your minimum viable offer, prototyping and testing, and then you can do your business model and do test marketing. That's sort of the sequence of things. I want to spend a few minutes though on the learn step, because I think it's probably the most crucial. And it's probably, if we were going to give a business, any one of our businesses, a grade in these 4 quadrants, grade ourselves A, B, C, D, like how are we doing? We're all doing, pretty well in design, and the business side of thing, the model things, it may be okay, but I'd say we get the lowest marks in learning and second lowest marks in testing. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why that's the case. But when we're in that learning stage, I want to show you one very powerful tool that I think you can use a lot with yourself and also with teams. Now you can look up Journey Map on the internet. You can find lots written about this. So there's nothing unique about my slide, but the idea is after you've done your research with customers, after you know what is going on with them, is to take their experience and lay it out in the form of a journey over time, because most customers interact with you over a series of steps. So whether it's a refrigerator, or a consulting assignment, or a car, or a piece of software, most customers go through some sort of process of planning. They say like, oh, I need a piece of software. I need to plan what I actually need. I need to shop, compare vendors. I need to go through the purchasing process. I need to learn how to use it. I actually use it. I have support problems. And the experience for the customer can be very different. Imagine taking a trip somewhere. Imagine you're doing this for transportation. And the first step is get to the airport, and I drive or I take an Uber. I get to the airport, I find my, terminal, I go through security, I eat, I get on the plane. Think of how many experiences, positive and negative, that traveler is going through. You better believe that, by the way, the airports, and particularly the better ones, are using design thinking and customer journey mapping to make the experience. That's why there's more plugs now in some airports than there used to be, because people are talking to customers about what they look for. And you're looking for experiential things from customers. What are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's your overall experience, pain and gain? And you use that learning to prioritize where in the customer journey can you make the biggest impact by making a design change, a design improvement. I pulled this picture off the internet. It's impossible to read, don't even try, just to show you that a company called Rail Europe broke down all the stages for travelers on their, on their rail that goes throughout Europe, and research and planning, shopping, booking, post-booking. Look at the little diagrams that they wrote, probably from a flip chart that was on a wall somewhere, and all of the work in synthesizing, prioritizing, and they came up with these boxes down the bottom, which are action items to improve their experience with customers. Journey mapping is a very powerful way to create a game plan for which part of the customer experience you're going to work on. Now, most organizations don't have a 4-stage design process. They have a 2-stage process, which I would describe as build it and ship it. Okay, what do? They jump right to, I got an idea, I know what we should build. Should we talk to customers? We don't need to, we know what customers need. You get the hand. We know what customers need. We don't need to do all that. We just need to get it out there to market and ship it, because time to market is important, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, it works sometimes, but it's fraught with great risk. It's a very expensive to go about way about doing things, because the thing you build can be much closer to the mark by talking to customers first, and even closer to the mark by getting feedback in the testing process. So I like to look at this circle this way, which really puts emphasis on learn and test. What is it about these learn and test steps that we skip that makes it so hard? Well, one human behavior aspect is you actually have to not only get out of the office, but you have to schedule a meeting with a customer. It's the discussion is, it's innovation. It's a little messy. It's not like showing them your product pipeline and that sort of thing. You're just doing discovery. And so it takes a certain amount of skill. It takes some time. People that do this well, follow the Stephen Covey maxim of doing things that are important but not urgent. They look at their calendar and they say, these 3 days, I'm going to be out of the office, spending time with customers. And over the course of a year, I'm sure it's going to pay off, because I'm going to get the learning and I'm going to have the chance to do the testing. And if you never do that, you'll never get there. So that's really important about prioritizing the time we spend with customers and not falling into the trap of organizations that just build it and ship it. Now, one technique that I think is very valuable that you can do with your leadership teams, this is a great exercise to do in your annual strategic planning offsite. I would do this first thing. If you had a 2-day offsite, I'd do in the morning the first day, which is to ideally break your team into more than one group and ask each group to imagine what we want our business to look like in 3 years. You've probably done some version of this, hopefully you have. The advantage of going out 3 years is that it allows you to rise out of all of the problems that are consuming you right now and get a clear head. It allows you to be much more aspirational about where you want to get to. And so when teams do this, they say, well, what's the deliverable? What should we bring back? And so I created this as a deliverable, but some teams created their own New York Times headline and put a headline as a way to communicate what their vision is. But if you want to fill in the blank, it's, well, here's your positioning statement today. What will your positioning statement be in 2023? What do you want your financials to look like? What revenue targets? What new products will you have that you don't have today? What markets will you be in? Will you be in China or India or Indonesia or Ohio? What new partners will we have, et cetera? And the thing is that the clearer and the more high resolution that 3-year vision is, or where you want to get to, the greater the sense of urgency to get there. The more you'll feel like, I don't have a minute to waste to get here. And now it's, you know what to do with year 1 and year 2. Okay, that's always a good exercise, but one thing I want to add to this exercise has been very valuable is to say, well, here, imagine this is I'm just plotting revenue, and the revenue on the high revenue line is what came out of our 3-year planning exercise. We want to be 90 million in 2023. And then the thing is to ask yourself, and particularly ask the sales team, if we just sold the heck out of every product and service we have, what's the maximum we could achieve in revenues by 2023? And usually what you'll get is the lower line. And the difference is your innovation gap. You have to fill that gap with some product or service that you don't have today. And believe me, 3 years goes pretty fast when you need to do an innovation. So I've used this exercise to give teams that didn't have enough urgency the sense of urgency that we got to get going now and put in place some kind of an innovation process. Okay, I've covered a lot of ground with you, but that was my goal, is to give you a framework, the S-curves, a sense of urgency that none of you is going to escape this S-curve, but also some confidence that there's some tools out there, and they're not secret tools. I mean, everything I showed you, I've sort of taken my favorites, but you can find a lot of good material to support design thinking and growth strategies and take this kind of approach. I want to just tell you a little bit about what I've done at Perkins to show you that not only have I done this, I mean, I've run a startup. I've been, an officer of a public software company. I've seen a lot of companies I've done, and I've invested in 10 startups. But nonprofit, that's different. How do you apply this in a nonprofit? And the Perkins School for the Blind was founded in 1829. It's a school in Watertown, Massachusetts, that has room for 200 students. And if that's all we did, we'd be a 200 student S-curve, pretty flat for 190 years. And fortunately, a lot of smart people before me got started in doing international work, teacher training work, accessible technology work. And so it's pretty diversified in the sense of the possibilities for growing. But honestly, Perkins wasn't growing when I got there 6 years ago. And it takes a push. The people that come into blindness education aren't necessarily growth strategists. They don't know pricing models and design thinking and that sort of thing. But you know what? They learn, because design thinking means more impact, more kids reached, more teachers that get hired. They realize that it's in their interests and the health, the long-term health of the nonprofit to learn these things. So believe me, on the Perkins campus, if you ask one of our teachers about design thinker and S-curve, it's a good chance they'll give you a pretty good answer to that, because they've been hearing that a lot from me the last couple of years. I'm going to show you something I showed my board, which is, there's another side. We have the heritage of Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan, and we want to keep that going. But I created a framework here. You saw that I was a consultant once upon a time, so you can't help yourself creating a 2x2 once in a while. But this was a way that I was explaining to the board, like, Dave, why are you doing all these new crazy things? We already do a lot of things. And I told them the stories about companies like Kodak and digital equipment and companies that aren't around anymore because they weren't paying attention. But I drew this map of our organization. These bubbles represent the lines of business of Perkins, okay? So you don't have to know what they all mean, but they are all, and the size of the bubble is roughly proportionate to their size, the scale of operation, their cost of operation or revenues. And the thing about this framework, as you'll see, is on the right is things that are mature. So things that are like, we've done the same thing for 10 years, whereas on the left are things we've never done before. So that's what the bottom, that's the delivery model. What's the material? So everything everything is right. We've been doing the same thing for 10 years and we're not doing any new things. The other axis is the potential to grow what we're doing. Okay, if we wanted to grow campus programs, could we? And the answer is we only have capacity for 200. And 95% of kids are vision impaired or in public schools. So so not only are our processes mature, but we're doing things that don't have the ability to reach other populations that have impact. So without taking you through, this is what I've been doing for 6 years, but without taking you through how I got there, this is where I am now. This is what the portfolio looks like. I'm going to start you in the lower right, because the things that we have been doing, we've freshened up a bit. They've moved to the left, and we've created a little bit of growth opportunity to freshen some of our approach. But mostly what we've done is we've taken our know-how from the lower right and spent time talking to our customers and understanding their experiences. When I say customers, I'm talking about children, parents, teachers, ministries of education around the world. Those are my customers, and donors. Those are my customers. And I talk to them, and I apply design thinking to them, and I find out what is they're looking for. And on that basis, I've launched a number of new ventures. We've really focused on India. India and Mexico are our international focus. Cortical visual impairment is the new form of blindness that nobody is prepared for. It's a national crisis, and we're going to be national leaders in doing it. Career launch means getting jobs for a population that has 70% unemployment. And why college success? Because of those students that graduate from public high school in the US, that actually go to college, top of the class, only 40% graduate. So we created a gap year program to help them get through college. So I don't know if all of these are going to make it, but my goal is to keep us, see that our portfolio is balanced now. And we have, what's mature. And what happens in a picture like this is the bubbles sort of move to the right and down, and then you start new things from the left and up. And so I'm just showing you, this is a tool that I use to educate my board to talk about what am I doing? I'm not an educator, I'm not a special needs educator. I know about growing organizations, and this is how Perkins is going to be around for another 190 years. Keith, with that, I'm going to put a bookmark here and see if there's any other questions or comments you'd like me to address in the remaining few minutes.
Yeah, so we've got several questions here, and coaches and those listening in, feel free to chat a question over to me. The first one, David, when we think about the S-curve, who owns the accountability in a mid-market company to keep their eye on the ball of creating successive S-curves through time? How would you answer that question?
That's a great question. It's really easy. The CEO. The CEO is the only person that can be sure that innovate. No, someone else will execute on it, but you can't have like someone in the marketing department or some product manager doing it without the CEO explicitly supporting and endorsing it, because the familiar kills the new. And so that's my answer. The CEO has to believe. All of these little bubbles on this chart, I'm personally protecting. They've all been attacked for dollars and people. And I say, no, you go over there. Don't worry about what those people are doing. So I say it's the CEO.
Okay. I love your saying, the familiar kills the new. Okay. The familiar kills the new. Now, Dave, think in terms about, you said earlier in design thinking, one of the most important things is for leaders to get out and talk to customers. And I forget the quote you've shared in the past, nothing new happens until you get out of the building. I'm trying to remember that quote.
Yeah, I'm thinking too hard about it, but yeah, there's nothing. There's nothing on the whiteboard. To learn, you have to go talk to the customers. I mean, there's no, and unfortunately, in too many organizations, you're going to hear this: we know what the customer needs, and that's a killer. That's a killer of killers.
So the question becomes, and I think it was a Steve Blank quote that I recall that you had shared several years ago, but who should be outside the four walls and how often? Okay, so clearly the CEO, if they own the S-curves, they need to be engaged with the right customers in conversation. But in a mid-market company, who should be out engaging customers in conversation, and how often?
Yeah. So in a mid-market company, you can't afford to have a separate department, innovation, and R&D group. So what I would say is the CEO owns the initiative and has a group that's working, that's identified, a task force, whatever you want to call it. I'd like to see someone from the product or engineering group, someone from the marketing group, and maybe someone from the services group, a mix of people who can listen from different angles, maybe, divvy up some customers and have an approach to listening what's going on with our customers now without an agenda. Unfortunately, this is not a good task to give to a salesperson. It's very hard for a salesperson to unwind from their focus on sales opportunities and quota. Salespeople actually will try to prevent the innovation team from seeing their customer, seen that a lot of times. So that's why the CEO has to say, no, sorry, this is a special group. Would you please give us the chance to have that meeting with the customer? So I would say it's a temporary group or a task force for a period of time. And that's how I've done these. These initiatives you see here were under the office of the president of Perkins until they can stand on their own.
Okay. And so let me make a statement, and then you can correct or modify it. Is the end goal, so let's say mid-market coaches are working with mid-market companies, and now they have the right leaders in regular conversations with customers. Is the goal, David, to identify the one or two unique problems that our company can solve that the customer may be very much in touch with or may not be able to quite see the problem yet? Is that the pattern of data they're looking for? Yeah,
it is. And I don't want to make this sound like this has to be a rogue activity in an organization. It's often that way when you're introducing it. Over time, as everyone in the organization is bought in and adopted a design thinking process, you can have a natural place where marketing and product management is working with the service and the engineering and other teams, and you can have but I think some kind of a cross-functional dialogue to decide kind of where to make new investments.
Okay. And the goal being finding the problem that the client may or may not be in touch with, that needs to be solved, that will help them. Okay. And David, what does the conversation look like?
And importantly, that becomes a basis for revenue growth for your organization.
Okay.
Sorry, your question, I was talking over it.
So what does that conversation look like? And maybe not all the detail, but is that more of a structured, unstructured conversation? Is it an hour? Is it on site? Is it off site of the customer? What might that look like? And you might even draw in a couple examples from the past that you've used with businesses.
Yeah. It's very unstructured. And so it feels like this, hey, Keith, we want to come by, a couple of us from the company want to come by, not to talk about hopefully things are going well with the product, but we're thinking about how, coronavirus or this new technology that's emerging, we're thinking about how electric vehicles are going to sort of change things for a lot of us. And we'd like to come by and ask, or your business was acquired by this corporation. We want to find out like what's happening now, or this new competitor just acquired another competitor. How are you thinking about that? You're looking to create an open-ended discussion where the customer is likely to invite you in because you do have a shared interest. You want them to do more of the talking, and you're listening. And honestly, I'm just going to say this, you don't really know what you're listening for. You're listening for a problem. Mm-hmm. The customer was going to have 10 problems, and 8 of them you can't do anything about. You're sifting for the 2, and then you're thinking, the way that meeting ends, ideally, is that you say to the customer, say, you know, Keith, the thing you were saying about a tool that will allow you to do something like that, or the thing you were saying about you just having a hard time keeping track of people and time or assets or whatever, if we came back with an idea for handling that, would you be open to a follow-on discussion? So that's how that meeting ends. And then you go back and you decide, do you think this is something you can tackle? And if so, the next step is you do something very big. That's why minimum viable product. Don't spend a lot of time and money, but mock up something you think makes sense. Go back to that customer, and and if they say, yeah, this is looking pretty good. Now, I like these things, but these things I don't like. Now you're in this. Now the customer has become your design partner, and you can I think get quickly to a great product. Not every customer wants to be that kind of a design partner. You have to be selective. You have to cultivate. Some customers want everything buttoned up and finished product. And so you're looking more for the early adopters. You're looking for the customers that like to be a part of the innovation process, customers that feel there's an advantage to them to influencing some of your design choices. And they're out there. You just have to think about the ones who are going to play that role for you.
Okay. Now, David, in the context of COVID and the crisis that we've been through globally, and now we're pivoting, moving to the recovery stage, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Would you agree with the following? Now more than ever is when leaders need to be out talking to their customers, because the problems coming at them are coming faster and more unique than they were in steady state a year ago. How would you modify that?
I don't really need to modify that. I agree with that. It's how I've been reacting and encouraged. Like when everything was shutting down all around us, I was saying to my team, get on the phone and talk to whoever you work with, your constituents, your customers, or just get on the phone. They will appreciate that you called. You don't have to have answers or know exactly why you're calling. Just call and check in on them. And we had some donors that care about Perkins calling us saying, how are you doing? And I appreciated that call back in the other direction. So I think that's just as a minute, there's a relationship piece. Anytime you interact with a customer, you have an opportunity to discover another aspect of what they're doing and another way to help them. And so, that comes as a byproduct. What I've done at Perkins, and look, we're in the education field, so this is something that fits for us. But I'm viewing that the things we're seeing that work in coronavirus are going to be many of them are going to be a permanent part of our delivery model. And I've already got a task force of 10 people across here. We have 600 people, so I have 10 people across the organization working in a task force to create a 2022 vision of what could Perkins look like if we sort of pushed remote communications to their limits, with donors, teachers around the world, whatever. And we're just creating scenarios. We're imagining what if we did this? What if we did that? And we're gonna have like a town hall, circulate a white paper. We don't think we're gonna have the answers ourselves, but we want to get the whole community to be thinking like, yeah, there's nothing earth-shattering about Zoom technology. What's really earth-shattering is how accessible people are in the you can set up a meeting in a day with someone that used to take a month and a plane trip to talk to. You can communicate an awful lot in webinar format and videos. I mean, we're not just sort of trying to mimic some of the things we did before. We're actually, I think, breaking some new ground in relationships and problem solving. And so I think to say, what about this do we want to keep forever? Because this is good, is a good way to think about it.
Okay, good. Well, David, with that, we're coming to the top of the hour. Let me end with 2 questions. What can we as a community of coaches and our clients be doing to help or support your efforts there at the Perkins School?
Oh, boy. Well, see what we're doing. We see what we're doing nationally. If you come to perkins.org and see what we're doing, working with children, across the country. And if you have people in your communities, wherever you are, that says, cortical visual impairment, Braille, these are things I need to learn more about, contact us. We're trying to be more available nationally. Secondly, I would say internationally, if in particular, you've got a connection to India or Mexico, we would love to engage you in some of the things that we're doing. We've served like 70 countries over 100 years, and the problem about that is it's not focused. So we're not walking away from countries where we do some work, but we very conscious in the last 2 years that said first India, now Mexico. Let's really go deep. Let's really understand what's going on there. And we're trying to get to know more people that care about what we're, India and Mexico and what we're doing there. We'd love to engage you on that topic. That's probably a good start.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, David. And we've enjoyed our time. And with your concurrence, we'll invite you back at a point in the future and we'll continue our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Keith.
Okay. Thank you so much, David.